actually has some great information on his travels in India.
I know the history.
And the
I think
history
it's better
and-
to know the history of the country that you're going to.
Absolutely.
The other things will come after we have the question and answer.
Excellent. So without further ado, I think we're going to let you take over.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity of speaking to you. It's important that you know something about the history, the art, and culture of the country that you're visiting. I want you to join in the discussion and in the presentation. Feel free to ask any questions anytime. If I say the word India, who or what comes to mind?
Butter chicken.
I'm sorry?
Food.
Food. All right, that's fine. Can we call it butter chicken? Anybody else? What comes to mind when I say the word India?
Like large temples?
Can we put that as religion?
Yes.
Anything else?
Taj Mahal.
Tell me.
Taj
Taj Mahal.
Of course. Have a picture.
Can we call that big cemeteries?
So what was the other one? Anything else? Comes to mind when you talk about India? Close. What is Gandhi famous or noted for as far as India is concerned? He is instrumental in helping India gain her independence. And from which country? Yeah. Okay, I'll put British, so that's better because you'll say that the word British. Okay, so we have something to go on. It's amazing that when you mention the word India, nobody thinks of one person, and that is Christopher Columbus. After all, it was Christopher Columbus who discovered that sea route from Europe to India. And he infuriated a lot of people with that idiotic, nonsensical notion that the world is round. And he further infuriated people that he was firmly convinced that he can find the East by going west. And so he approached Queen Isabella of Spain and mentioned the idea that he could bring an unimaginable wealth of spices, silks, and other things from India that were currently being brought by land routes, overland routes, Marco Polo and the other Arab merchants. And that trade was making the merchants of Venice very wealthy because they bought the spices and other goods from the Arab merchants and they sold it to fellow Europeans at an exorbitant price. Queen Isabella of Spain realized that Spain lagged far behind. And she logically decided that, okay, we will finance this trip. If the voyage failed, if the mission failed, the cost could be borne. But if it ever succeeded, you know, the unimaginable wealth that would come from India and the other countries, and that would make Spain very prosperous and give it more power. So we know that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And of course, the rest is history. At the very same time, Portugal was also thinking of the same thing. And they had one great explorer before Vasco da Gama, and his name was Dias, D-I-A-S. And he was exploring the western coast of Africa. And on 2 occasions, he came right to the tip of the southern part of this great continent, and it was called the Cape of Storms, because every time anybody went there, there was always a storm brewing. So he explored it for almost 10 years, And he saw this vast expanse of water, and from all the information coming from the land routes, they figured that he could join these two together and find the sea route to India. So 10 years later, there was another great Portuguese explorer, and it was Vasco da Gama, who came down following Diaz's expedition to the Cape of Storms, because it was called the Cape of Storms because the storm was overwhelming. So he waited out the storm and then proceeded eastward. But before he proceeded, he renamed the Cape of Storms to the Cape of Good Hope, and then proceeded eastward. And he is recorded in history as being the very first European to sail the waters of the Indian Ocean. And so in 1498, he landed in Calicut, which is in the southwestern part of India, and established a trade route and a trading post. Although the fame and fortune of discovering a sea route from European countries to India was his to claim, he inadvertently ushered the age of imperialism that eventually saw other Europeans conquer India, Malaysia, Indonesia, and we had colonization of it. So the British followed, and they came here to Madras and established a trading post over here on the southeast. The French followed, and they established their trading post over here. And of course, all of them came as traders, but all of them, cast anxious looks and greedy eyes on India, and they fought their own battles on foreign soil. At the time of the arrival of the Europeans, the Mughal Empire was the dominant power in India, and there are four great Mughal emperors. The first was Babur or Babur, Humayun, Akbar the Great, and Shah Jahan, the Magnificent. Shah Jahan was also a very good ruler, and he increased the wealth of the Mughal Empire. The original Babur came from Afghanistan, and they conquered India and established the rule. They ruled for 150 years. But as the years went by, and we had Jahangir and Aurangzeb. By the time it came to Aurangzeb, Aurangzeb was a good ruler, but he was also a great fanatic, a Muslim fanatic. And he, in his effort to make India Muslim, he naturally paid less attention to the governing of the Mughal Empire, and gradually it deteriorated. In the meantime, the three powers, the the Portuguese, the British, and the French, were, dividing and conquering. And a great war took place between the French sponsored Indian prince and a British sponsored Indian prince. It lasted for 7 years. Eventually, the one that the British sponsored and supported won. So that gave the British more power and the French less power. So while they were doing this thing, it was Shah Jahan who had married for the third time, and her name was Mumtaz Mahal. She was a Persian princess, and it seemed that she was the love of his life. And she eventually died in giving birth to her 14th child. Even though he had concubines and other things, he very dearly loved her. And when she died, of course, a year later, he decided to build a monument to her. And of course, that was the result was the Taj Mahal. It took 21 years to build, and over 30,000 workers and 1,000 elephants to be used as transportation. All I can give. The main feature of the Taj Mahal is that dome, and it's surrounded by 4 minarets. It sort of frames that beautiful dome, which is built of marble and embedded with precious stones. There are 8 arches that go into the Taj Mahal, and it's 8 because according to Islam, there are 8 what you call stages of life that one must go through before they reach heaven. And the beauty of that 8 arches is that all of them are identical. And no matter from where you look at it or how you look at it, it's identical. And according to Islam, they do not like the decoration, adornment of graves. So they are inside down in the crypt, in a simple crypt with their faces turned towards the east, which is Mecca. So back to the British, while they were pushed the French out literally, they dominated India. And they always divided and conquered. They would tell one Indian prince against the other, and supply them with cannons and all the rest of it. So they sort of literally cut their own throats. But it gave them so much of power that eventually the Indians were, just about sick and tired that this is not right to be under foreign domination. And a great revolution, a great mutiny took place in 1857. And it is the only time that the Indians and the Muslims got together against the British. Another reason why they revolted and mutinied is because the cartridges that the British issued were greased with either pig fat or cow fat, which is, of course, repulsive to both the Indians and to the Hindus and the Muslims. So they joined forces in that great mutiny of 1857, and it was quite quiet. It lasted for more than a year. Britain sent additional forces to India, and they eventually crushed that rebellion. So that gave them even more power. And eventually the British East India Trading Company, the original idea of trading, was dissolved, and India became under the crown of the British Empire and known as British India. At that time, while this was going on, Gandhi had graduated from law school in England, and he was offered a job in South Africa as a legal advisor. He learned firsthand of how horrible it was, the discrimination against not only the Indians but also the blacks. And he learned it firsthand when he could hardly come to South Africa when he was thrown out of a first-class compartment, even though he had a first-class ticket. And so he, in South Africa, while he was witnessing all these things, he came up with the idea of Satyagraha, which means Satya is T-Y-A, and the word Sati means truth. And he came up with the idea that it'll be the quest for the truth, and by the truth. But it will be achieved by non-violent means. And so they fought for that, and eventually they were given some concessions. In the meantime, he had to return to India, and in 1915 he came back to India, and he was just as surprised and astonished at the way the Indians were treated. And he continued with that Satyagraha, a form of non-violence, and he did a lot of good. He even went to jail several times. He joined the Indian Congress Party and was a senior member then, along with Nehru, the first Prime Minister. But, you know, it didn't have much until World War I and II. And India fought on the side of the British on both occasions because they figured that maybe if we fight for the British, they will be more considerate and give them the independence. So World War I finished in 1945. And the British themselves realized that, you know, they had come as traders and had stayed to conquer us for more than 200 years. It was time to leave. And so they were discussing how they would hand over the power to the Indian Congress Party. And while they were discussing it, there was a leader of the Muslim League, Jinnah, who thought and rightfully wondered and worried what would happen to the Muslims under predominantly Hindu rule. Because there was about 80% Hindus to 17% Muslims, and the rest, the 3% were Christians, Buddhists, and things like that. So he had very good reason to worry about what would happen to the Muslims under a predominantly and hateful, intolerant Hindu majority. They could never agree. All it took was one person to throw a pig into a mosque, and all hell will break loose. And the atrocities that will be committed is beyond imagination. And the same thing with Hindus. All they have to do is to throw a cow into a temple, and the same thing would happen. And so the Jinnah had every good reason to worry about it, and he suggested that maybe they should partition India. And Gandhi said, please, you know, whatever problems we have, we'll solve it, but don't partition India. But Jinnah, of course, didn't trust the Hindus and didn't have any good hopes that they would live in peace. And of course he was correct. And but nevertheless, the Muslims had a very good reason that they would want a homeland. And so it was, India was partitioned, and this west of India, northwest became West Pakistan, because there was quite a lot of Muslims in this area, and quite a lot of Muslims in this area, in the east. So this became West Pakistan, and this became East Pakistan. Now there were also many Hindus living in what was going to be Pakistan, and many Muslims that were going to be India. So they decided that, you know, all the Hindus from Pakistan and that side would come to India, and all the Muslims would go to Pakistan. And while they crossed, you know, it took just very one small incident to ignite a real massacre. You know, the hatred, the ignorance, the intolerance, all it needed was a little match. And that set aflame a terrible massacre that defies all description. More than 1 million people were massacred, and more than 11 million were displaced. But eventually that did take place, and on the 15th of August 1947, India got her independence and Pakistan got her independence. But the rioting and the communal violence still pursued, and Gandhi decided that he would go on a fast to death. And that was sort of agreed upon, and nothing would persuade Gandhi to stop the fast. But Nehru and the other members of the Congress Party came to him, and they went all over India, and they got assurances from all the Indian princes, whoever's in charge, that they will live in peace and harmony, that the property, the lives, and the religion of the Muslims will be honored. Of course, you know, not all agreed to it, but here was a chance to get rid of the Muslims, because it's 80% against 17%. So anyway, they did convince Gandhi, and they did promise that they would live in peace. So one day when he was going for his prayer meeting, he climbed the steps to the meeting, and there was this radical, as you ever have terrorists, like as you call them, who did not like the idea of letting the Muslims go. So he waited for him, for Gandhi. And as Gandhi climbed the steps, this guy, his name is Godfrey, D.S.C. And he waited, in a lovely position, knowing pretty well that Gandhi would pass there. And as Gandhi climbed the steps, the traditional namaste, he was greeting the people when the guy opened fire, and he fired 3 shots, point blank. And while the blood was all over Gandhi's white shawl, he still had that greeting, and he blessed the assassin. And Gandhi was assassinated on 30th of January, 1948, which is less than 6 months from independence. And that, of course, ended Gandhi's life, and it brought a lot of sadness to the world, just like the passing of Mandela. But it is amazing that up to this very day, the hatred between the Hindus and the Muslims continues. One of the legacies that the British left, apart from dividing and partitioning India and Pakistan, is the question of Kashmir. To this very day, it's a problem, because the kingdom of Kashmir was ruled by a Hindu prince, a Hindu Maharaja. But the majority of the inhabitants of Kashmir were Muslims. And India didn't want to put it to a vote, because if you put it to a vote, it would go to Pakistan. And so the India refused to put it to a vote, and of course that Hindu Maharaja received several death threats. And he appealed to India for help. India sent troops to protect the Maharaja. Pakistan said, well, what's going to happen to the Muslim population? They're going to wipe out. So they sent troops. And the inevitable happened. And the very first war of Pakistan took place. And there was, of course, the United Nations ceasefire. And they can now stare at each other across the border, the demarcation line. But it is a very touchy and serious and explosive situation, because both India and Pakistan are major powers. And today we have to live with that, and the only thing that is stopping that is the deterrence. You might fire the first shot, but the retaliation is going to come. Just like the Soviets and the Americans, they did not go to nuclear war because of the counter-strike. The mutual destruction prevented them from going to war. And we are in this position, and we will continue to be it until we all see the light and say, there's no point in fighting. It doesn't achieve anything. And with this, I leave you if there are any questions to ask. Any questions?
That's the historical thing, but what about India today?
Yeah, India today, let us first say, while the British were conquerors, they didn't brutalize. They kept, any revolution or any talk of dissent, trampled them and kept them under their foot. But they, in all fairness, they did not brutalize India. As a matter of fact, they did a lot of good. For example, they introduced the parliamentary system of government that we have to this very day, which is similar to Britain and to Canada. And we are now the largest democracy in the world. They also introduced a lot of social and judicial reforms, like in Rajput over here, a Hindu woman would have to throw herself on the funeral pyre when her husband dies. It is incredible. And so now with India, the other thing that the British left is the education system. It's second to none when it comes to education. And you'll find that today in NASA, all the engineers and scientists are mostly from India. That education system has stood us in good stead. Today, that we are now one of the leaders in technology, especially when it comes to computers. And so that's one of the great legacies that the British left, is the parliamentary reforms and the educational reforms. Now, while the British were there, and you know, there's a little island over there, and they ruled from Australia to Canada. You know, the sun never set on the British Empire. So they needed somebody to look after their interest. And lo and behold, while they were there for over 200 years, they encouraged the fraternization of the British troops and British officials with the Indians. And thereby was born the Anglo-Indian race, of which all three of us are. You know, if you look at my name, it's Leslie Michael. You know, I'm from India, and I got a British name. So what was very funny is when I was in my studies in Munich, Germany, they would ask me, so Leslie, you're from India? Yes. You have a British name? Yes. You read, write, and speak German? Yes. And you're Catholic? Yes. He says, you're a darn funny Indian. No, that's not a joke. That's what they told me. And it's, as I said, it's always good to know something about the country you're visiting. The 3 years that I was in Germany, there was only one question they asked me, and that is, why are the cows holy? And I said, I don't know, I'm Catholic. And so that will give you an idea. So I don't want you to go blindly to India. To know something of the art, the culture, and food. Somebody mentioned food. Yeah. It's not just butter chicken. The Indian cuisine is absolutely lovely. And the question that keeps coming up is why do people in India and other hot countries eat a lot of spices? But the answer is really quite simple, because it's a hot country. And we're talking about the Indian villages, poor people. They don't have refrigeration. So they put spices to preserve the food, the leftovers. They have no fridge. So they have to go to the market every day. So whatever food is left over, that spice is preserved. So that would be a very logical explanation as to why we use spices. And not only that it preserves the food, it's very good for you. It preserves the human body. Any questions?
So it took 90 years for them to get it?
Yes, it took 90 years for them to. But the British had, you know, after that revolution of 1857, it occurred to them that they've been there long enough and it's time to hand over the powers to the Hindus, which were the majority there. And they would have done it sooner had it not been for the Muslim League. They had a very good, legitimate reason to worry. And if they were there, I'm sure, you know, 80 against 17, the Muslims would have been decimated or whatever. So that was a very good reason. And it's just that even after that, the mutiny, they still kept fighting. The Hindus and the Muslims. They just can't live in peace. And there's no reason. If you put an Indian and a Pakistani together, you wouldn't know the difference. They're Indians, but except the religion is different. So, you know, you think that they would come to their senses and say, for the good of the country, for the good of all of us, let's have peace. We're all Indians, Mother India they call it, but just a religion. And if you looking at that flag, this color is, you know, what the Buddhist monks wear. Color. It signifies penance, mortification, self-denial. It's purity, which India is famous. You know, a lot of people go to India and they try to climb up the mountains, you know, and try to look for gurus and things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'll come to that. This is purity, spirituality, purity, prosperity. Now, and this, of course, is the spinning wheel. One of the things the British did, which was not very good, is that the raw cotton of India was taken to England, to the textile mills, made into garments, brought back to India, and sold to the Indians, which of course is not right. They never gave them anything for the cotton, because they were rulers. And so it was Gandhi who said, he called for a boycott of that, not only just a boycott, but to throw all those garments that were made in England into a bonfire. So that was a protest. Again, it's peaceful protest, not so and then he introduced the spinning wheel. The spinning wheel was there, but he sort of brought it forward by saying that, hey, why don't we use our cotton and make our own garments, and by hand. And the British laughed at it. Well, today, handloom material from India is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So that's the way the ball bounces. But it's to use a little common sense to be self-sufficient. The one thing about India is very noticeable is that it's very rich and very poor. There is not a very large middle class, but now thanks to all technology and job opportunities and the world becoming small, that there is a rising middle class with people with more disposable income. And so there is great hope for India to come up. But we still have a long way to go, even though we don't have, because we're all Hindus in India, but there are still Muslims in India. It boggles the mind that you cannot live in peace. Just a little incident and people will set a train on fire, with people in it. And yet we tell people we are non-violent. So that is something that has to be done. And I think the only way that it could be done is to, I hate to repeat it, but God said, love one another as I have loved you. Why do I have to look at you and say you're from a different country, with a different religion? We were all created equal, all created in the image and likeness of God. And I think we have to, as Christians, I want you all to be good leaders and show by example and learn, talk to people and say, what is it that I can do for you? Don't go to India like a lot of people go, you're going to make a fast buck. No, it is only in trying to help others and giving to others. It's only in giving that you will receive. So remember, when you go to India and you're all pretty well going to be into the business world, to the secular world very soon, what is it that I can do, just not for India, but for others? But to think of the others who are less fortunate, maligned, and don't have the opportunity that all of us have. So I guess I can entertain any of my own.
Oh, no, this is
What
wonderful.
questions do you have?
Thank you. Well, actually, you know what? You've answered a lot of them already. This has just been wonderful having you come and just to see the passion that you have about, and it's actually really great to hear about the history of India and how the people have sort of, come about and developed and how they've integrated with each other and how they have not. And just, really what you said about how we should come, right? It's not just walk in there, we're gonna go there and, change the lives of the kids that are right there, but really to embrace everything that everyone's come from and just to make an imprint, but also allow it to imprint onto us for further, as you get older. So thank you very much for sharing your wealth of information. So thank you very much. All right, okay, I guess so.